"Don't move," Officer Ryan Caldwell said, his hand already clamped around Naomi Whitaker's wrist as if the quiet black woman in the blue dress had become a threat just by standing in the park. The sound came next, sharp and small, not loud enough to stop traffic, but loud enough to make every head near the fountain turn. A seam gave way near her shoulder where his grip had pulled too hard, and for one breath the whole park seemed to forget how to move. A jogger slowed without realizing it. A mother pulled her stroller closer. 2 teenagers lifted their phones. And behind Naomi, a 12-year-old boy named Caleb Brooks held a plastic box of handmade bracelets against his chest like it was the only thing in the world he still owned. Caldwell looked at the torn fabric, then at Naomi's face, waiting for fear, waiting for tears, waiting for the kind of surrender he had learned to expect from people who could not afford trouble. But Naomi did not scream. She did not step back. She only lifted her chin, held the loosened fabric carefully against her shoulder, and said in a voice so calm it made the silence heavier, "Officer, you just made a very serious mistake. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe now, because what happens in this park will not stay in this park, and the man with the badge has no idea whose name he just dragged into the dirt." It was 4:17 on a warm Friday afternoon in May, the kind of afternoon when downtown Raleigh smelled like cut grass, food trucks, and rain waiting somewhere beyond the clouds. Harlan Park sat only 6 blocks from the state capitol, polished enough for donors, peaceful enough for families, and watched closely enough that certain people were made to feel unwelcome without anyone having to say the quiet part out loud. Naomi had come alone, without a driver, without cameras, without the pearl earrings the newspapers liked to mention whenever they printed her picture beside her husband's. She wore simple flats, a soft blue dress, and a tan cardigan folded over one arm. In her purse was a small notebook filled with names, dates, and stories from families who said they had been stopped, searched, questioned, or pushed out of public places for reasons no one ever wrote honestly on a report. She had not come to make a speech. She had come to listen. That was why she noticed Caleb before the officers did. He stood near the path by the fountain, offering bracelets made of braided cord for $5 each, his sneakers dusty, his smile careful. "For my mom's medicine," he told a woman who passed without looking down. Naomi bought 2, asked his name, and had just knelt to tie one around her wrist when the patrol car rolled up along the curb. Officer Caldwell stepped out first, tall, pale, broad through the shoulders, with sunglasses hiding his eyes and the easy confidence of a man who believed the uniform made every public space his living room. His younger partner, Officer Mark Ellis, followed half a step behind, already looking uncomfortable. Caldwell's gaze went from the bracelet box to Caleb's face, then to Naomi's hand resting protectively near the boy's shoulder. "Selling without a permit?" he asked. Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Naomi stood slowly, the bracelet still loose around her wrist. "He's a child," she said. "He's standing in a public park." Caldwell smiled without warmth. "Ma'am, I wasn't talking to you." The wind moved through the trees, soft and green, but something colder passed through the people watching. Naomi heard it in the way nobody spoke, in the way shoes shifted on the pavement, in the way Caleb took one small step behind her. She looked at Caldwell's badge, memorized the number, then met his hidden eyes. "Then you should start," she said, "because I'm asking why you're frightening a boy who has done nothing wrong." Naomi had learned a long time ago that people revealed themselves most clearly when they believed no one important was watching. That was why she had asked the governor's security team to stay 2 blocks away that afternoon, why she had left the black sedan behind the old courthouse, and why her wedding ring was turned inward against her palm. She did not want polished answers from department heads or rehearsed smiles from city officials. She wanted the truth that lived on sidewalks, near bus stops, beside playground fences, in the tight space between a mother's warning and a child's fear. For 3 months, she had been filling that small notebook with names. A grandmother told her she had stopped bringing her grandson to Harlan Park because officers questioned him every time he wore a hoodie. A high school senior said he was told to empty his backpack on the same bench where white students ate lunch without being approached. A street musician said his permit was checked twice a week, always by the same officer, always in front of people who then walked away from his open guitar case. Naomi wrote it all down in careful blue ink. Not because she needed proof that pain existed, but because the State House only respected pain when it arrived with dates, badge numbers, and witnesses. Caleb Brooks was not supposed to be part of her notes that day. He was supposed to be a quick moment of kindness, a boy with nervous eyes and strong little hands, trying to make something useful out of colored cord and hope. His bracelet box had a label taped to the lid that read $5 each, "Thank you," written in pencil so soft it had nearly faded. Naomi saw the way adults moved around him, not cruelly, not openly, but with the practiced blindness people used when poverty made them uncomfortable. She knew that invisibility. Before she ever became Naomi Whittaker, before reporters called her graceful, before donors asked to sit near her at dinners, she had been Naomi Reed from a narrow brick apartment in Durham, raised by a mother who cleaned hospital rooms at night and still ironed Naomi's school uniform every morning like dignity could be pressed into cotton. Her mother used to say, "Baby, walk like your name belongs in every room, even when they act like the floor was not built for your feet." Naomi carried that sentence everywhere. She carried it through law school, through courtrooms where opposing counsel mistook her for an assistant, through charity galas where women touched her hair without asking, through campaign events where strangers praised her husband for being brave enough to marry her as if love were an act of politics. That afternoon, standing between Caleb and Officer Caldwell, she felt her mother's words settle across her shoulders more firmly than the torn seam of her dress. The park around her was bright and ordinary, children running through the splash pad, a golden retriever pulling at a leash, traffic humming beyond the trees. Yet inside that ordinary light, something old and familiar had opened its mouth. Officer Ellis shifted his weight beside the patrol car, his eyes dropping to the notebook sticking out of Naomi's purse. He saw the rows of dates. He saw Caldwell's badge number already written halfway down the page. For a second, his expression changed, as if he understood they had not stopped a random woman at all, but a mirror. Caldwell did not notice. He was too busy looking at Naomi the way men like him looked at anyone they had already decided to shrink. "You need to step aside," he said. Naomi folded the loose edge of her cardigan over her shoulder, not to hide shame, but to keep the moment from becoming what he wanted it to become. "No," she said quietly. "I need your name, your badge number, and the reason you approached this child." Caleb's breathing fluttered behind her. His bracelet box trembled against his shirt. Naomi reached back just enough for him to see her open palm, steady and low, a silent promise that he was not alone. Caldwell's jaw tightened. The fountain kept spilling silver water into the basin. Phones remained raised. And somewhere 2 blocks away, a state security driver glanced at the time, unaware that the quiet woman he had been told not to follow was about to become the center of a storm no one in Raleigh would be able to ignore. Officer Ryan Caldwell had spent 13 years learning how to make a public space feel like his private property. He knew where to stand so people would lower their eyes before he spoke. He knew how to rest one hand near his belt without saying a word. He knew how to turn a question into a warning and a warning into a command. Harlan Park had become one of his favorite places to patrol because it gave him the audience he liked best: joggers in clean shoes, office workers with iced coffee, parents who thanked him for keeping things orderly without ever asking who had been made to feel disorderly first. To them, Caldwell was a wall between comfort and inconvenience. To the people he stopped, he was the weather, sudden, unavoidable, and always blamed on something they must have done. His file downtown was thick, but carefully softened. A complaint from a black college student became a misunderstanding. A statement from a street vendor became noncompliance. A mother who said her teenage son had been searched without cause was told the officer had acted within policy. Caldwell survived because he understood the language of power. He never wrote anger into his reports. He wrote concern. He never wrote suspicion without cause. He wrote public safety. He never wrote that a boy selling bracelets made him look weak in front of families who expected the park to stay polished. He wrote unauthorized solicitation. Officer Mark Ellis knew all of this, or enough of it to feel the weight of it whenever he rode beside Caldwell. Ellis was 29, a former Marine reservist from Asheville, raised by a father who believed rules mattered because rules protected people from men who confused authority with character. But in the department, Ellis had learned another lesson, quieter and uglier. Good officers could disappear under bad silence. Promotions went to men who did not embarrass the unit. Backup arrived faster for men who did not ask too many questions. Complaints became gossip, and gossip became isolation. So Ellis had stayed careful. He had told himself that caution was not the same as cowardice, right up until he saw Caleb's hand shaking around that plastic bracelet box. Caldwell took one step closer to Naomi, lowering his voice so the nearest phones would catch less of it. "Ma'am, this is your last chance to move away from the minor and let us handle this." Naomi did not move. The torn seam at her shoulder fluttered in the breeze, and the blue fabric looked painfully bright against the gray shine of Caldwell's badge. "Handle what?" she asked. "A child standing near a fountain." A few people murmured, but no one stepped forward. That was the strange cruelty of crowds. They could become witnesses before they became human. Caldwell turned his head just enough to glance at them, reminding everyone that he still had the uniform, the radio, the authority to make their peaceful afternoon complicated. Then he looked back at Naomi. "You are interfering with an investigation." "Then state the investigation clearly," Naomi said. Her voice stayed even, but Ellis saw the pulse move at the base of her throat. She was not fearless. She was choosing steadiness while fear stood right beside her. That choice bothered him more than panic would have. Caldwell pointed at Caleb's box. "We have had complaints about illegal sales in this park." Caleb whispered, "I was not bothering anybody." Caldwell's sunglasses tilted toward him. "Do not talk over me." Naomi shifted slightly, placing herself between the boy and the officer without touching either of them. "He answered because you accused him." "I did not accuse him." "You approached him like guilt was already decided." The words landed cleanly. Not loud. Not dramatic. Clean. Somewhere behind the crowd, a cyclist stopped with one foot on the pavement. The fountain water kept falling in soft, endless sheets. Caldwell's mouth tightened. He was used to anger, used to pleading, used to people over-explaining themselves until he could call it agitation. Naomi gave him none of that. She gave him accuracy, and accuracy was harder to shove aside. Ellis looked again at the notebook in her purse. Names. Dates. Badge numbers. His stomach pulled inward. "Ryan," he said quietly, almost too quietly, "maybe we should just verify if there was a complaint." Caldwell did not look at him. "I have it under control." Naomi heard the sentence and felt its real meaning. Control was the thing he wanted, not safety. Control of the boy. Control of the crowd. Control of her posture, her voice, her place in the afternoon. She thought of every mother who had spoken to her in church basements and community rooms, every person who said the same thing in different words. They do not have to arrest you to make you feel trapped. They only have to remind you they can. Caldwell reached toward Caleb's box. Naomi's hand lifted, not fast, not threatening, simply present. "Do not take his property without documenting it," she said. The park seemed to inhale. Caldwell stared at her hand as if her refusal had crossed an invisible line. Ellis's radio crackled with distant static. A little girl near the playground asked her father why everyone was quiet. And Naomi, still standing in the torn blue dress, understood that the afternoon had moved past misunderstanding. This was no longer about bracelets. It was about who was allowed to stand in sunlight without permission. Naomi did not raise her voice, and somehow that made Officer Caldwell angrier than if she had shouted. Calm had a way of exposing cruelty. It took away the excuse of chaos. She could feel the entire park leaning toward the moment, not physically, but with attention, the way a room leans toward a glass about to fall from the edge of a table. Caleb stood behind her, so close she could hear the small uneven breaths he was trying to hide. His bracelet box was pressed flat against his chest, the clear plastic lid fogged slightly from the warmth of his hands. Naomi wanted to turn around and tell him this was not his fault, that grown men often blamed children when their own pride felt small, but she kept her eyes on Caldwell because the boy needed more than comfort now. He needed an adult willing to stand where fear had told everyone else to step away. "Officer," Naomi said, "I am asking one more time. What law has this child broken?" Caldwell gave a short laugh, the kind meant for the crowd more than the person in front of him. "You people always think you know the law when it suits you." The words did not explode. They seeped. A few faces changed. A man near the food truck looked down at his shoes. The woman with the stroller stopped pretending to adjust the blanket. Officer Ellis blinked once, slowly, as if he had just heard a door close inside himself. Naomi let the sentence hang in the warm air. She had spent years in courtrooms learning that some statements should not be interrupted because silence could make them confess. You people, she repeated softly. Is that part of your official report? Caldwell's smile vanished. Do not twist my words. I did not have to. Her answer was quiet, but it traveled. Someone behind her whispered, did she just say that? Caleb shifted, and the bracelets inside the box clicked together like tiny bones of color. Caldwell reached for the box again, faster this time, not grabbing the boy, but taking hold of the plastic edge as if the object itself had offended him. Caleb's hands tightened. That is mine, he said, his voice thin but clear. Naomi placed her own hand over the lid, steadying it between them. If you intend to seize property, you need to explain the reason and provide documentation. Caldwell leaned closer. Lady, you need to back up. Naomi could smell coffee on his breath and the sharp leather scent of his uniform gear warmed by the sun. She could also smell the fountain water, the grass, the cinnamon sugar from a cart 20 feet away, ordinary things surrounding an extraordinary wrong. My name is Naomi, she said. And I am not backing away from a child because you are embarrassed. The crowd reacted then, not loudly, but enough. A breath. A murmur. A phone raised higher. Caldwell heard it all. For the first time, the audience was not giving him the shape he wanted. He turned his head toward Ellis. Control the crowd. Ellis did not move right away. His eyes were on Caleb, then Naomi, then the torn seam at her shoulder, then the badge number written in her notebook. Ryan, he said under his breath, this is not worth it. Caldwell's face hardened. I said control the crowd. Ellis stepped toward the people with their phones, but his voice came out lower than policy required. Please keep a reasonable distance. He did not tell them to stop recording. Naomi noticed. Caldwell noticed too. That small refusal changed the air between the two officers. Naomi saw the crack, and she stepped carefully into it. Officer Ellis, she said, still looking at Caldwell, you are witnessing this. I am asking you to remember exactly what happens next. Ellis froze. His name in her mouth made him look less like a uniform and more like a man who would have to sleep later with whatever he chose now. Caldwell's hand left the box and pointed toward Naomi. You are interfering with police business. No, Naomi said. I am documenting it. She reached slowly into her purse and pulled out the small blue notebook. She did not wave it. She did not threaten. She opened it to the page where Caldwell's number already waited beneath 3 other complaints from the same park. The sunlight caught the ink. Caldwell's eyes dropped to the page, and something flickered behind his sunglasses. Recognition, maybe. Or fear wearing anger's coat. Where did you get those names? He asked. Naomi held the notebook close to her chest. From people who were tired of not being believed. Caleb looked up at her then, really looked, as if she had become more than a stranger who bought bracelets. She became proof that his trembling hands had not imagined the danger. Caldwell took one step back, not in surrender, but in calculation. The fountain kept spilling light. The phones kept recording. And Naomi understood that standing up did not always feel brave. Sometimes it felt like standing alone on a narrow bridge, with the wind pushing hard and a child behind you who still believed you could keep it from breaking. Caldwell stared at the notebook as if the blue ink had insulted him more deeply than any spoken word could have. For a second, the park held its breath around him. Naomi could see the calculation working behind his sunglasses, the quick inventory of faces, phones, witnesses, and risk. Men like Caldwell did not fear being wrong. They feared being seen being wrong. He lowered his hand slowly, then gave a thin smile that did not reach his cheeks. You have been collecting names about me, he asked. Naomi kept the notebook steady against her chest. I have been collecting the truth. No, he said, taking a step closer. You have been interfering with officers doing their jobs, stirring people up, making children think rules do not apply to them. Caleb's face tightened behind her. Naomi felt his fear before she heard it. It moved through the air like cold water. She turned just enough to soften her voice for him. Caleb, keep your hands where everyone can see them, and do not argue. The boy nodded, swallowing hard. Caldwell noticed the instruction and laughed under his breath. Listen to that. Training him like he is already in trouble. Naomi looked back at him. No, officer. I am protecting him from what you might write later. That sentence changed Caldwell's face. The smoothness disappeared. His pride, already bruised by the phones and the murmurs, rose up like heat from pavement. That is enough, he said. Put the notebook away. No, the word was small, but it landed with the weight of a locked door. Caldwell reached toward the notebook, not striking, not lunging, just taking the space in front of her as if her belongings and her body were both things he could move by decision. Naomi stepped back one pace to keep the notebook from his hand. Her heel brushed the low stone edge around the fountain. Caleb whispered her name, though he had only learned it minutes earlier. Ellis moved half a step forward. Ryan, stop. Caldwell snapped his head toward him. Stay out of this. The command cracked through the open air. Then, in the awkward motion of everyone trying to hold their ground at once, Caldwell's fingers caught the loose edge of Naomi's dress near the already torn seam. The fabric gave way a little more with a soft ripping sound that seemed impossibly loud. Naomi froze. The crowd froze with her. No one saw skin. No one saw scandal. They saw humiliation. They saw a woman forced to gather dignity with both hands while a man in uniform stood too close and called it procedure. A sound came from the crowd, part gasp, part shame. The woman with the stroller covered her mouth. One of the teenagers stopped recording for half a second, then lifted the phone again with trembling fingers. Caleb stepped forward as if to help, but Naomi held one palm back without looking at him. She would not let the child be pulled into the center of Caldwell's anger. Her shoulder felt bare to the wind, but her eyes stayed dry. Her fingers gathered the blue fabric, and the bracelet Caleb had made slip down her wrist, bright yellow and green against her skin. Caldwell looked around quickly. She pulled away, he said, louder now, speaking to the crowd, to the phones, to the report he had already begun composing in his head. She created this situation. Naomi's voice came out lower than before. You created this when you decided a black child in a park needed to be controlled. The words moved through the crowd like a match touched to paper. Caldwell's face flushed. Do not make this about race. Naomi almost smiled, but there was no joy in it. You did that before I stood up. Ellis looked at the ground. That was the moment his silence became visible, even to himself. His father's voice came back to him from years ago. Rules protect people from men who confuse authority with character. He had thought courage would arrive loudly if he ever needed it, with certainty, with clean edges. Instead, it arrived as nausea in his stomach and the sight of a woman holding torn cloth together in front of a fountain while a boy tried not to cry. Caldwell turned toward him. Get her identification. Ellis did not move. Mark, Caldwell warned. Naomi heard the first name and watched Ellis's jaw work. He was standing at the fork in his own life. One road was familiar, quiet, safe. The other had witnesses. I said get her identification. Ellis finally looked up. For what charge? The park went silent in a new way. Not frightened now. Listening. Caldwell's mouth opened, then closed. A cyclist whispered, there it is. The fountain kept pouring water behind them, steady and indifferent, silver over stone. Naomi drew her cardigan over her shoulder with careful hands. She was embarrassed. She was angry. She was frightened enough to feel her pulse in her teeth. But beneath all of that, something stronger settled in her spine. Caldwell had wanted her small. Instead, every second he stood there made the truth larger. 2 blocks away, inside a black sedan parked behind the old courthouse, Naomi's security driver looked again at the dashboard clock. Then his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. There is a situation at Harlan Park. Black woman. Blue dress. Officer involved. The driver's face changed. He opened the live video attached to the message, and the first thing he saw was the bracelet on Naomi Whitaker's wrist. For a moment, nobody moved. The park did not become quiet all at once, it quieted in layers. First the conversations near the food trucks faded. Then the children by the splash pad slowed, sensing the adults had stopped pretending everything was normal. Then even the fountain seemed softer, its silver water falling over stone like it was trying not to interrupt. Naomi stood at the center of it, one hand holding her cardigan across her shoulder, the other still open behind her to keep Caleb back. The wind moved through the trees and lifted the loose edge of her dress, but she did not look down. She looked at Officer Caldwell's badge, at Officer Ellis's face, at the phones catching every second, and she let the silence do what shouting never could. It made everyone feel the weight of what had just happened. Her mother used to call moments like this the long second, the place between harm and response, where a person decided whether pain would make them cruel or clear. Naomi felt heat in her cheeks, a hard ache behind her eyes, and the old familiar sting of being reduced before being recognized. Not as a lawyer. Not as a wife. Not as a woman with a name, a history, a mind, a family. Just a black woman who had been expected to lower her voice and accept the shape someone else gave her. Caleb's breathing trembled behind her. That sound pulled her back from the edge of anger. She turned slightly, just enough to see him without giving Caldwell her back. The boy's eyes were wet, but he was fighting not to let the tears fall. His bracelet box hung from his fingers now, forgotten and heavy. "Miss Naomi," he whispered, "I am sorry." The word struck her harder than Caldwell's command ever could have. A child was apologizing for being protected. Naomi's throat tightened, but her voice stayed warm. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "Do you hear me?" "Nothing." Caleb nodded, though he did not look convinced. That was how fear worked on children. It made innocence feel like evidence. Nearby, the woman with the stroller finally stepped forward a few inches, then stopped, as if courage had reached her feet but not her mouth. The teenager recording the video wiped his face with his sleeve and kept filming. Officer Ellis lowered his gaze to the pavement, and Naomi saw shame moving across him like cloud shadow over grass. Caldwell, desperate to recover the authority slipping out of his hands, pointed toward the growing crowd. "Everyone needs to step back. This is an active police matter." His voice sounded different now. Less certain. Too loud for the space. Naomi breathed in slowly. The air smelled of wet stone, cut grass, and the faint sweetness of lemonade from a nearby stand. Ordinary America. Public America. The kind of place politicians promised belonged to everyone. She thought of the bill sitting on her husband's desk, the one that had kept him awake for weeks because every signature carried enemies, donors, police unions, headlines, consequences. Independent review boards. Public complaint records. Body camera audits. Words that sounded cold on paper until they became a boy with a bracelet box and a woman holding her torn dress together in a park. Naomi had planned to bring Thomas stories. Now the story had found her body. If this moment touched your heart, remember that dignity is not protected by silence. It is protected by people brave enough to stand still when fear tells them to disappear. Naomi looked at Officer Ellis. "You asked him for a charge," she said quietly. "Ask him again." Ellis swallowed. Caldwell snapped, "Do not answer her." Naomi did not blink. "He does not have to answer me. He has to answer the truth." The words settled over the fountain, the grass, the watching faces. Ellis lifted his eyes. For the first time since he stepped out of the patrol car, he looked directly at Caldwell without looking for permission. "What is the charge, Ryan?" he asked. Caldwell stared at him, stunned by the betrayal of a simple question. In the pause that followed, a black sedan turned the corner beyond the park gates, moving fast but controlled. Then another followed. Then a third. The low sound of engines rolled beneath the trees. Naomi heard it before she saw it, and her expression changed only slightly, not with relief, not yet, but with the quiet recognition that the long second was ending. Caldwell turned toward the street, irritation flashing across his face. "Now what?" he muttered. Naomi looked down at Caleb's bracelet on her wrist, bright against her skin, and gently tightened the knot with her thumb. "Now," she said, almost to herself, "everyone tells the truth." The first sedan stopped at the curb with a soft scrape of tires against gravel, and the doors opened before the engine fully settled. Two state security officers stepped out, dark suits sharp against the green of the park, their eyes moving quickly over the crowd, the fountain, the patrol car, the phones, and finally Naomi. One of them, Daniel Price, had driven her for almost 4 years. He knew the way she waved off umbrellas, the way she carried paper bags of groceries herself, the way she asked staff members about their children by name. He had never seen her standing in public with one hand holding a torn dress together and a child hidden behind her shoulder. His face changed before he could control it. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said, and the title traveled farther than a shout. Caldwell turned his head slowly. The color in his face shifted, not disappearing all at once, but draining in small, visible stages. "Mrs. Who?" he asked, but no one answered him because the second sedan had already stopped behind the first. A tall man stepped out without waiting for anyone to open his door. Governor Thomas Whittaker moved fast across the sidewalk, his tie loosened from a meeting he had left without explanation, his expression held together by discipline and something much deeper than anger. People recognized him instantly. A murmur rolled through the park, phones turning, whispers catching fire. "That is the governor. That is Thomas Whittaker. Wait, is that his wife?" Naomi saw him coming and felt the strange ache of relief mixed with sorrow. She had not wanted power to be the thing that made them listen. She had wanted her words to be enough, Caleb's fear to be enough, the truth in broad daylight to be enough. But America often recognized humanity only after status introduced it. Thomas reached her and stopped just close enough to see her eyes first, not the dress, not the crowd, not the officer. "Naomi," he said softly. In that one word was husband, witness, apology, and fear. He removed his suit jacket and placed it carefully around her shoulders, not rushing, not making a spectacle of tenderness, just covering what humiliation had tried to expose. Then he turned to Caldwell. The park seemed to shrink around the two men. "What happened to my wife?" Thomas asked. Caldwell's mouth opened. For the first time since stepping from the patrol car, no practiced sentence came easily. "Governor, there was a situation involving unauthorized sales and interference. She refused a lawful instruction." Thomas looked at Caleb, who stood frozen with the bracelet box clutched in both hands. "This child?" he asked. Caldwell glanced at the boy as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Sir, we had complaints." "From whom?" Thomas asked. Caldwell blinked. "I would need to check the call log." Naomi spoke before he could build another wall of vague language. He approached Caleb without giving a clear reason. "When I asked for the basis, he escalated. Officer Ellis asked him for the charge. He did not provide one." Every face turned toward Ellis. The younger officer looked like the ground had been taken from under him. Caldwell's stare cut toward him, warning, pleading, threatening all at once. Ellis swallowed. The radio at his shoulder hissed. The fountain kept falling. "Officer Ellis," Thomas said, his voice steady but cold, "is that accurate?" Ellis looked at Naomi, then Caleb, then the phones around them, then finally at Caldwell. Something tired left his face. Something honest took its place. "Yes, Governor," he said. "That is accurate." Caldwell whispered, "Mark." Ellis did not look away. "There was no stated charge. I did not hear a specific complaint. I heard Officer Caldwell use language that was inappropriate, and I saw the contact that caused damage to her clothing. The words did not sound dramatic. They sounded official. That made them devastating." A ripple moved through the crowd. The woman with the stroller began to cry silently. The teenager holding the phone lowered it for just a second, stunned by the simple force of truth spoken aloud. Caldwell's shoulders tightened as if the uniform itself had become too small. "This is being taken out of context," he said. Thomas stepped closer, not with rage, but with the authority of a man who no longer needed to raise his voice. "The context is standing right in front of you." Naomi reached for Caleb's hand then, gently, giving him the choice to take it. After a moment, he did. His fingers were cold despite the warm afternoon. Thomas looked down at the bright bracelet on Naomi's wrist, then at the box in Caleb's hands, and the last trace of public composure nearly broke across his face. He turned back to Caldwell. "You thought she was alone," he said. Caldwell said nothing. "That was your mistake." The wind moved through the trees above them, carrying the smell of rain closer now. Somewhere beyond the gates, another siren sounded in the distance, but northwest one in the park moved. They were watching the moment when power finally recognized the person it had tried to dismiss. For several seconds after Ellis spoke, Officer Caldwell stood in the middle of Harlan Park with nothing left to hide behind except the badge on his chest. The crowd had changed shape around him. They were no longer a loose ring of curious strangers. They were witnesses now, pulled together by the same stunned understanding. A man near the food truck lowered his sunglasses and looked at Caldwell with open disgust. The woman with the stroller wiped her cheek, then moved closer to Caleb as if her own silence had become too heavy to carry. Caldwell saw all of it. He saw the governor standing beside Naomi. He saw the state security officers speaking quietly into their earpieces. He saw Ellis, his own partner, refusing to take back the truth. And finally, he saw Naomi, wrapped in Thomas Whitaker's jacket, still holding Caleb's hand, her face calm in a way that made his apology arrive before his pride could stop it. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, his voice rough and smaller than before, "I did not know who you were." The words fell badly. Even before Naomi answered, he seemed to understand that he had confessed to the wrong sin. Thomas's jaw tightened, but Naomi touched his wrist lightly, not to quiet him as a wife quiets a husband, but to keep the moment from becoming another display of power speaking over pain. She looked at Caldwell for a long second. "That is the problem, officer," she said. "You should not have needed to know who I was." The park went still again. Not shocked this time. Listening. Caldwell's lips parted, but no defense came. Naomi continued, her voice low enough that people had to lean inward to hear it, and that made every word feel heavier. "If I had been a nurse after a 12-hour shift, would your conduct have been acceptable? If I had been a grandmother walking home from church, would it have been acceptable? If Caleb had no one standing beside him, would your report have made him the problem?" Caleb's fingers tightened around hers. Caldwell looked at the boy, and for the first time, his face showed something close to recognition, not kindness yet, not redemption, but the beginning of seeing someone he had tried to flatten into paperwork. "I made a mistake," Caldwell said. Naomi nodded once. "You made a choice." Ellis closed his eyes briefly, as if those 4 words had reached him too. Daniel Price stepped closer and spoke quietly to the governor, explaining that the police chief was on the line and that internal affairs had been notified. Thomas did not take his eyes off Caldwell. "Officer Caldwell, you are relieved from this scene pending review. Your body camera footage, radio logs, and prior complaint records will be preserved." Caldwell swallowed. "Governor, with respect, this is moving fast." Naomi looked at the fountain, then at the phones, then at Caleb's bracelet box. "No," she said. "For the people who have been waiting to be believed, this has been moving painfully slow." A low murmur passed through the crowd. The teenager who had recorded most of the incident stepped forward with his phone held in both hands. "Ma'am," he said to Naomi, his voice shaking, "I have the whole thing. From when he walked up to the kid." Naomi turned to him with a gentleness that surprised him. "Thank you for not looking away." The boy nodded and stepped back, his eyes wet. Thomas asked one of the security officers to collect contact information from witnesses, but Naomi raised a hand. "Not just from people who filmed today," she said. She opened her notebook and held it out to him. "From everyone in here too." Thomas took the notebook carefully, as if it were fragile and dangerous at the same time. He flipped one page, then another. Names. Dates. Parks. Bus stops. Street corners. Badge numbers. Stories that had been treated like smoke until the afternoon gave them a flame. His face changed as he read. The politician disappeared. The husband disappeared. What remained was a man realizing that his office had been moving at the speed of comfort while people outside his windows lived at the speed of fear. "We will open every case," he said. Naomi's eyes searched his. "Publicly." Thomas nodded. "Publicly." Caldwell stared at the notebook as if each page were a door closing behind him. Ellis removed his cap and held it at his side. "I will give a full statement," he said. His voice trembled, but it did not break. Naomi looked at him, and he seemed almost unable to bear her gaze. "I should have stepped in sooner," he said. "Yes," Naomi answered. "There was no cruelty in it. That made it harder. But sooner is gone. What matters is what you do now." Ellis nodded, shame and relief crossing his face together. Then Caleb tugged gently at Naomi's hand. "Are they going to take my bracelets?" he asked. For the first time all afternoon, Naomi's expression softened fully. She crouched beside him, keeping Thomas's jacket around her shoulders. "No, sweetheart," she said. "Today they are going to buy them." Thomas reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. Then Daniel Price did the same. Then the woman with the stroller. Then the cyclist. One by one, people stepped forward, not because bracelets could fix what had happened, but because a child who had been made to feel like a problem needed to feel, for one small moment, like the center of care. Caldwell watched from beside the patrol car, silent now, while Caleb's plastic box slowly emptied into open hands. By the next morning, Harlan Park looked almost ordinary again. The fountain still poured silver water over stone, joggers still moved along the path, and the food trucks still opened their windows beneath the soft Carolina sun. But something had changed in the air. People did not pass the fountain without looking at it. They did not walk past the bench where Caleb had stood without slowing down. A place that had once swallowed quiet stories had finally been forced to remember one. The video had spread across the state before midnight, not because Naomi wanted attention, but because truth sometimes travels fastest when people can no longer deny what they are seeing. By 8 in the morning, Officer Ryan Caldwell had been suspended pending a full investigation. By noon, the police chief announced that every prior complaint connected to Caldwell would be reopened by an independent review panel. By 3, Officer Mark Ellis had given a sworn statement, not polished, not heroic, but honest. He admitted what he had seen, what he had failed to stop, and what he should have said sooner. His voice shook during the statement, but he did not take the easy road back into silence. That mattered. Not enough to erase the harm, but enough to begin a different kind of record. 3 days later, Governor Thomas Whitaker stood inside the state capitol with the police accountability bill on the desk before him. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled the room. Officials waited for the kind of speech that would make the moment sound clean. But Thomas did not speak first. He looked toward the front row, where Naomi sat with Caleb Brooks and his mother, Angela, a tired woman in a Navy work uniform who held her son's hand like she had almost lost more than an afternoon in a park. Naomi wore a simple cream jacket, her blue dress repaired but not forgotten, and around her wrist was Caleb's yellow and green bracelet. It did not match the room. That was why it mattered. Thomas picked up the pen, then paused. "This bill should not require my wife to be humiliated in public for people to believe families who have been telling the truth for years," he said. The room became still. Power has no honor if it only protects the comfortable. Then he signed his name. The sound of the pen moving across paper was small, almost fragile, but everyone heard it. No one clapped right away. The silence came first, deep and full, the kind that does not mean emptiness, but recognition. Naomi looked down at Caleb. He was staring at the signature as if a door had opened somewhere he had never been allowed to enter. "Does this mean they have to listen now?" he whispered. Naomi placed her hand over his. "It means we make sure they do." Weeks passed. The new review board opened its first public hearing. Families who had once spoken in church basements and kitchen corners walked into a government building and said their names into microphones. Some voices trembled. Some broke. Some carried years of anger in a single sentence. Naomi attended without sitting on the stage. She sat among them, where listening belonged. Caldwell's case moved forward, not as a private misunderstanding, not as a quiet transfer, but as part of a public record. For the first time, the paperwork used the word misconduct instead of concern. It used bias instead of instinct. It used accountability instead of unfortunate incident. And Caleb kept making bracelets. Only now, people bought them because they knew his name, not because they pitied him. One afternoon, Naomi returned to Harlan Park alone. The same bench waited near the fountain. The same trees moved in the wind. She sat down and opened her notebook to a clean page. For a while, she wrote nothing. She just listened to the water, the footsteps, the distant laughter of children playing without checking who was watching them. Her mother's old words came back softly. "Walk like your name belongs in every room." Naomi touched Caleb's bracelet and smiled, not because justice had become easy, but because silence had finally lost one place to hide. Kindness had not made her weak. It had made her steady enough to stand between a frightened child and a man who mistook authority for truth. And maybe that was the lesson Harlan Park would carry long after the cameras left. Real strength does not tear people down to feel tall. Real strength protects dignity, even when no one powerful is supposed to be watching. So what would you have done if you had been standing in that park that day? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have stepped forward,